The tweet was only 14 words long, but it hit harder than any debate punch ever could. It landed like a thunderclap across timelines, the kind of line that freezes a scrolling thumb mid-swipe. In that instant, Karoline Leavitt's carefully crafted attempt to cancel Jasmine Crockett collapsed under the weight of something sharper, smarter, and infinitely more human. The power of a single sentence turned the hunter into the hunted, and the stage belonged to Jasmine. Moments earlier, Leavitt had been riding high. Her team had blasted out a statement designed to shame Crockett, to strip her down to a caricature and erase her credibility. It was the classic play. Paint the outspoken congresswoman as too loud, too aggressive, too much. But what Leavitt and her allies failed to grasp was that Crockett had built her entire identity on being unapologetically herself, on wielding truth like a weapon against those who tried to silence her. When Crockett's tweet appeared, it wasn't offensive, it wasn't desperate. It was bold, cutting, and laced with a kind of dignity that can't be faked. It said, in essence, you can throw every insult in the book, but you'll never erase who I am, where I come from, or what I fight for. Well, at 14 words that transformed the narrative in real time, the replies lit up instantly. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Supporters shouted their approval, while even neutral observers couldn't help but marvel at the precision. It wasn't just a clapback. It was a declaration of ownership over the very identity Leavitt had tried to weaponize against her. Jasmine wasn't playing defense. She was rewriting the script, and as Leavitt's cancellation attempt unraveled, before the eyes of millions, something larger came into focus. This wasn't just a spat between two politicians. It wasn't even just about a single viral tweet. It was about who gets to define the story of America, the young conservative, voice eager to gatekeep her identity, the unapologetic black congresswoman refusing to be silenced. The internet gasped, laughed, cheered. But underneath the viral storm was a deeper current, one that would carry this clash far beyond a single tweet.
Outspeeds?
Because the spark had already caught fire. And what came next would leave the country in disbelief. To understand why this clash mattered, you have to step back and see the battlefield it unfolded on. In 2025 America, politics isn't confined to committee rooms or campaign rallies. It lives and breathes on the screens in our hands, where one viral post can launch a career or end it overnight. It's an era where identity is both a weapon and shield, where the power to tell your own story can mean the difference between becoming a leader or being erased. And into this storm walked two women, each claiming to speak for the future of America. On one side stood Karoline Leavitt, young, brash, and hungry for the spotlight. She had carved her name into the conservative movement by leaning into outrage, calling out woke mobs, and wrapping herself in the language of patriotism. To her followers, she was the embodiment of unapologetic right-wing defiance. To her critics, she was a provocateur whose politics depended less on truth than on stirring division. And when she set her sights on Jasmine Crockett, she believed she'd found her next easy target. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't built to be a prop in anyone else's narrative. She had earned her stripes in the trenches, a progressive truth-teller, unapologetically fierce, unafraid to say the things others only whispered. She had walked into the halls of Congress carrying not just her own voice, but the echoes of communities that too often went unheard. For her, politics wasn't theater. It was survival. When Leavitt tried to cancel her, to strip her down to a stereotype, Crockett understood that she wasn't just defending herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been told to shrink, to stay quiet, to know their place. That's what made this moment bigger than a tweet. At its core, it was a battle for narrative control. Leavitt wanted to control the frame. Crockett, as the angry, unhinged progressive who didn't deserve the platform she had. But Crockett flipped it with 14 words that cut through the noise. Suddenly, it wasn't Leavitt defining Jasmine. It was Jasmine defining herself. And in that reversal lay the true drama, a fight over who gets to tell America's story, and whose voices get amplified or silenced. The timing made it even more explosive. Cancel culture wasn't just a buzzword. It was the fault line of American politics in 2025, conservatives wielded it as proof that free speech was under attack, while progressives called it accountability. It's a way to hold power to account in a world where injustice often escaped punishment. Into that arena stepped Crockett and Leavitt, avatars of their respective camps, their clash echoing far beyond their personal rivalry. Social feeds lit up with debates. Was Crockett a hero for turning the tables, or was she just another player? In the endless cycle of outrage, was Leavitt's move a calculated play for relevance, or a misstep that revealed her own hypocrisy? Each opinion poured fuel on the fire. Each share pulled new eyes into the drama. And as the fire spread online, it became clear this was no ordinary political spat. It wasn't just about one congresswoman defending herself against a rising conservative. It was about power, identity, and the very future of how truth would be told in America. And while millions laughed at the savage brilliance of one tweet, those who looked closer could see it. The stage was set for a confrontation that was only just beginning. Karoline Leavitt built her career like a bonfire, feeding it with sparks of outrage until the flames roared high enough to make her impossible to ignore. Young, sharp-tongued, and camera-ready, she quickly rose through the conservative ranks as a culture warrior who seemed to relish confrontation more than policy. Her brand wasn't compromise, it was combat. Her speeches dripped with defiance. Her interviews laced with punchy one-liners designed to go viral on cable news and social media alike. For her followers, she was the voice they'd been craving. Unfiltered, unapologetic, and proud to throw verbal grenades at the woke establishment. But beneath the slogans and sound bites, there was a contradiction that followed her everywhere. Leavitt preached the gospel of free speech, claiming that her side was constantly silenced by elites and gatekeepers. Yet time and again, she wielded her platform not to expand dialogue, but to shut it down. Her version of free speech seemed to mean freedom for her allies, but none for her opponents. It was a weaponized definition, one that allowed her to cry foul when challenged, while mercilessly trying to cancel those who dared to stand against her. The pattern was hard to miss. When a journalist pressed her on inconsistencies in her record, she dismissed them as fake news hacks who should lose their credentials. When a college student questioned her stance at a town hall, she mocked them publicly, turning their sincerity into a viral clip that bolstered her own brand. Every clash became a notch on her belt, every confrontation a chance to posture as the underdog fighting an imagined giant. And it worked. The cameras followed, the headlines multiplied, her bass grew louder in their applause. But applause can be addictive. In Leavitt's case, it became the drug that drove every move. She wasn't just chasing votes. She was chasing validation. Every fight needed to be bigger than the last, every insult sharper, every feud nastier. The louder she yelled, the more attention she earned. The cycle was intoxicating. But it also carried a hidden danger. The higher she climbed on her tower of outrage, the farther she had to fall. That's what made her attempt to cancel Jasmine Crockett so telling. In her mind, it was just another easy skirmish. Crockett, after all, was everything Leavitt thought she could exploit: outspoken, unapologetically black, unafraid of confrontation. To Leavitt, that meant too aggressive, a perfect foil to paint as unhinged and unfit. The playbook was familiar. Reduce your opponent to a caricature, strip them of complexity, and dominate the narrative before they even have a chance to respond. But Leavitt underestimated something critical. She mistook Crockett's fire for recklessness, assuming that she could corner her with the same tactics she used against less seasoned adversaries. What she didn't see was the precision behind Crockett's words, the way she balanced her passion with strategy. Leavitt thought she was walking into another shouting match she could control. Instead, she was walking into a duel she wasn't prepared for. Her overconfidence was her greatest flaw. She had won so many minor battles, humiliating critics on stage, dunking on opponents in interviews, stoking her base with viral moments that she believed she couldn't lose. She thought the formula was foolproof. Find a target, strike hard, dominate the news cycle, move on stronger than before. But formulas fail when they meet someone who doesn't play by the expected rules. And Jasmine Crockett was not about to play the role Leavitt had written for her. In the hours after her attack on Crockett, Leavitt reveled in the attention. Her allies amplified her words, pundits repeated her talking points. And she no doubt smiled at the thought of another feather in her cap. Yet in the quiet corners of the internet, a countercurrent was already forming. People weren't buying the caricature. They were waiting, watching, refreshing their feeds, curious about how Crockett would answer. And when that answer came, it would hit harder than anything Leavitt had anticipated. That's the paradox of arrogance. It can build you a stage, it can fill you with the confidence to stride onto it, but it blinds you to the possibility that someone else might rewrite the script. Karoline Leavitt believed she controlled the narrative, that her words would drown out any response. But arrogance has a way of meeting its match in unexpected ways. And for Karoline, that reckoning was about to arrive. Jasmine Crockett did not stumble into politics by accident, nor did she inherit her place in Congress from a dynasty of power brokers. Her story begins in the marrow of struggle, in the hard, unglamorous work of public service that demanded more grit than glory. Long before the cameras turned her way, she was already sharpening her voice in courtrooms and community halls, standing up for people who had little but their truth to defend them. She didn't just learn how to fight, she learned how to fight for others, how to carry battles that weren't her own and transform them into victories for those without power. Her rise was never smooth. As a black woman in the rough terrain of American politics, she faced the stereotypes that cling like shadows, too loud, too emotional, too radical. Every insult hurled her way was meant to box her in, to confine her to the corner that society had already drawn. But Jasmine refused confinement. She built her reputation on turning those attacks into fuel. They called her too loud, she made sure her voice echoed further. They dismissed her as too emotional, she wore her heart on her sleeve. And showed that empathy could be a weapon as sharp as any statistic. Her colleagues and critics alike learned quickly. Jasmine Crockett didn't shrink. She didn't apologize for being fiery, and she didn't tone herself down to make others comfortable. But beneath that fire was discipline, a strategic precision that made her words sting, not just burn. She knew when to unleash a savage line and when to hold back, when to fight in the open and when to let her silence do the work. That balance made her not just a fighter, but a tactician. Someone who could read a room and sense exactly when the moment was ripe for impact. And then, there were the clapbacks. They became her signature, not because she sought them out, but because she never allowed herself to be silenced. Time after time, when opponents tried to paint her as illegitimate or unworthy, she flipped the script with a line so sharp it felt like a blade slicing through hypocrisy. Clips of her responses ricocheted across social media, turning her into a cultural force beyond the walls of Congress. People shared her words not just because they were witty, but because they were true. Authenticity has a frequency, and Jasmine spoke in a tone that rang out like a bell. That authenticity became her anchor. She didn't filter herself to fit the mold of what politicians were supposed to look or sound like. She didn't soften her edges for comfort or compromise. Her voice resonated because it was real, because it carried the rawness of lived experience. When she spoke about inequality, people believed her because they could feel she wasn't reciting talking points. She was channeling something deeper, something earned through resilience. For marginalized communities, her rise meant something more profound than another face in Congress. Jasmine represented possibility. Proof that unapologetic truth could still break through in a system designed to reward conformity. Immigrants, working-class families, people who had been told their voices didn't matter, they saw in her a reflection of themselves. She wasn't distant or untouchable. She was one of them, carrying their stories into rooms where they had long been excluded, and that's why every fight for Jasmine Crockett is personal. Each clash isn't just a debate between politicians. It's a confrontation between dignity and dismissal, between authenticity and performance. She doesn't spar for sport. She sparred because she knows the consequences when voices like hers are muted, when power goes unchallenged, when truth is drowned out by noise. That's why her words land with such weight, because she carries more than herself. when she speaks. The clash with Karoline Leavitt was never just about two women with opposing politics. It was about the archetypes they embodied. Leavitt came to the table with arrogance, sound bites, and the safety net of a system that had always bent in her favor. Crockett came armed with resilience, authenticity, and the scars of every time she had been told she didn't belong. One sought attention. The other sought justice. One played to the cameras. The other spoke to the people. So when Jasmine crafted her 14-word tweet, it wasn't a stunt. It was the culmination of everything she had learned how to wield. Brevity, like a sword. How to speak not just to an opponent, but to the millions watching. How to turn a moment of attempted erasure into a moment of affirmation.
Ow.
She didn't simply clap back at Leavitt. She reframed the story entirely, reminding her supporters that power doesn't always sit with the loudest voice or the biggest platform. Sometimes it belongs to the one who dares to be unapologetically real. For Jasmine Crockett, politics has always been more than performance. It is survival. It is storytelling. It is a fight for the dignity of those who rarely get the mic. And when her opponents try to cancel her, to reduce her to a stereotype, she doesn't just defend herself. She defends the principle that every voice, no matter how inconvenient, has the right to be heard. For Jasmine, every fight is personal, and that's why her words carry weight, as her words lit up the internet, echoing louder than any press release or pundit spin. The country began to realize this was not a clash Leavitt could control. This was a reckoning. Jasmine was only getting started. The feud didn't ignite in a single spark. It spread like a brush fire. Starting with Karoline Leavitt's carefully constructed attempt to cancel Jasmine Crockett. On her feeds, Leavitt dropped post after post, painting herself as the enforcer of morality, the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of who deserved legitimacy in politics. With her trademark snarl wrapped in a smile, she framed Crockett as reckless, irresponsible, unworthy of public trust. The language was sharp but predictable, the kind of red meat rhetoric her base devoured eagerly. To her supporters, it was confirmation that Leavitt was once again owning the libs. The reaction was immediate. Conservative commentators rushed to amplify her posts, clipping sound bites, plastering screenshots, and echoing the same talking points across podcasts and primetime. Within hours, hashtags sprouted, each one designed to belittle Crockett and cement Leavitt's narrative before Jasmine even had a chance to speak. Looked for a brief moment like the culture warrior had the upper hand, but Jasmine Crockett did not take the bait. She didn't fire back instantly. She didn't scramble to defend herself or flood the timeline with frantic rebuttals. Instead, she went quiet. That silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. While Leavitt's words ricocheted across the internet, Crockett held her ground, letting the noise build around her like the rumble before a storm, and people noticed. Her supporters, accustomed to her quick-fire clapbacks, began refreshing their feeds, waiting for the moment when Jasmine would strike. Comment sections buzzed with anticipation. Where's Jasmine? She's going to light her up. Any? Minute now. The waiting became its own kind of drama, a countdown clock that made Leavitt's attacks feel more like background noise than a knockout punch. Leavitt, emboldened by the lack of response, doubled down. She posted again, more combative than before, adding fuel to her own bonfire. To her, Crockett's silence must have looked like surrender. She leaned into it, convinced she had cornered her opponent, that the absence of immediate backlash was proof of victory. But what she couldn't see was the precision behind Jasmine's restraint. Crockett wasn't hiding. She was calculating. She understood that in the world of viral politics, timing is everything. Too fast, and the response blends into the noise. Too slow, and the moment passes. But perfectly timed, that's when a reply transforms into a cultural event. The internet was restless now. Influencers speculated, journalists whispered about whether Crockett would respond, and casual observers checked their phones more often than usual. Every refresh was a gamble. Had the tweet dropped yet? Had Jasmine spoken? The tension was no longer between Leavitt and Crockett. It was between silence and expectation. And then finally it happened. Out of the quiet, with no warning, Jasmine Crockett's reply appeared. No long threads, no defensive essay. Just one tweet. Sharp, simple, and savage. The kind of line that could not be misinterpreted, could not be softened, could not be ignored. It sliced through the noise like glass shattering on concrete. In an instant, timelines froze. And all the energy Leavitt had tried to summon collapsed under the weight of Crockett's words. Supporters erupted in laughter, applause, and disbelief. Even critics paused, grudgingly acknowledging the precision. The silence had ended. With it came the realization that the game had shifted. Then came the tweet, sharp, simple, and savage. It landed without warning, a sudden rupture in the noise, like the crack of thunder in a silent night. Jasmine Crockett's tweet. Just 14 words, no fluff, no hashtags, no emojis, appeared on the screen. At first glance, it was almost too simple to bear to carry weight. But simplicity has a way of slicing deeper than a paragraph ever could. Within seconds, timelines lit up. Screenshots flew across platforms. People gasped, laughed, and shared, each retweet multiplying the reach until it felt less like a post and more like a cultural event. The impact was immediate. Supporters erupted with joy, posting strings of crying, laughing emojis, gifs of mic drops, and clips of exploding fireworks. "This is why we love her," one follower wrote. Another simply declared, "Game over." The humor hit first, the sheer audacity of Crockett's precision line, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Pride. Even vindication. For her base, this wasn't just a clever comeback. It was proof that dignity could cut sharper than cruelty. That authenticity could dismantle arrogance. And the memes came fast. Someone layered her tweet over a still from a boxing match, the opponent crumpling to the ground as if knocked out by a single punch. Another created a split screen of Leavitt's cancellation attempt beside Crockett's reply, with the caption, "Expectations versus reality."
Bye.
By nightfall, TikTok was flooded with dramatic readings of the tweet set to epic soundtrack music, while Instagram Reels looped it over and over with exaggerated sound effects. A sword unsheathing, a record. Scratch, the deafening drop of a mic. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's feed told a different story. Just hours before, she had basked in attention, convinced her narrative had stuck, but the tweet shattered that illusion. Her silence spoke volumes at first, as though she hadn't yet decided how to respond. When she finally did post, it was defensive, layered with excuses, heavy with over-explaining. Her words carried none of the sharpness that had once energized her base. They read instead like scrambling, like someone frantically patching holes in a sinking ship. Our critics noticed. "She's rattled," one journalist wrote. "You can see it in every line." Crockett, on the other hand, was serene. She didn't follow up with another thread. She didn't crow about victory. She let the internet do the talking. That silence this time, deliberate restraint after the strike, magnified the power of the original tweet. It was the difference. Between shouting and whispering, a whisper well-timed, forces everyone to lean in. Commentators piled on. Pundits who had once doubted Crockett's ability to withstand relentless culture war attacks were suddenly calling her a master of the modern political clapback. Late-night hosts opened their monologues with her line. One even dramatized it on stage, pacing like a stand-up comedian, pausing for effect, and letting the audience roar with laughter at the punchline. Crockett's words had transcended politics. They had become entertainment, a cultural moment replayed in living rooms and on phones across the country. And behind the humor was something more profound. The sense that, just for once, the narrative had shifted in favor of the truth-teller. In an era where viral outrage often rewards the loudest, Crockett proved that control could belong to the calm, to the precise. To the one who knows exactly when to strike. In congressional hallways, colleagues whispered about it between votes. One imagined scene repeated across news coverage. Staffers huddled over phones, gasping, stifling laughter, replaying the moment again and again. For allies, it was exhilarating, proof that their champion could withstand the fire and come out laughing. For opponents, it was humbling, a reminder that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was a dangerous mistake. And then there was the silence in Leavitt's camp. Insiders leaked that her team scrambled late into the night, strategizing how to spin the moment, whether to lean into victimhood or double down on aggression. But no matter the choice, the damage was done. A single line had flipped the story, and no press release could undo the image of Leavitt as the one left flustered and defensive. The cinematic beats were undeniable. The pause before the tweet dropped, the gasp when it appeared, the laughter that followed, the scramble of the opponent, it all played like a scene written for the big screen. You could almost hear the soundtrack, the silence, the tension, the sudden boom of impact. And yet, for Jasmine Crockett, this was not performance. It was principle. She hadn't just humiliated an opponent. She had asserted a truth deeper than any campaign slogan. Her words carried the weight of her journey, of the countless times voices like hers had been dismissed, and the resolve to never again allow silence to be imposed upon her. Online, the storm intensified. Hashtags celebrating Crockett shot to the top of trending lists. Commentators framed it as the defining political clapback of the year, perhaps even the decade. Articles flooded the digital sphere, each one dissecting the moment, replaying the 14 words, asking what it meant for the future of political discourse. And still, Crockett said nothing further, allowing the echo to carry on its own. Leavitt's followers tried desperately to pivot, to claim she had somehow baited Crockett into responding, but their spin only highlighted the imbalance.
The contrast
Was too stark, one woman calm and unshaken, the other visibly rattled. One line had redefined the entire clash, turning what had been framed as a cancellation attempt into a cautionary tale about arrogance meeting its match. It wasn't just a tweet. It was a mic drop that reverberated across the country. Millions laughed, applauded, and shared. The narrative tightened around one undeniable truth. Jasmine Crockett had seized control of the moment, and Karoline Leavitt had lost it. But the real shock wasn't in the tweet itself, it was in the storm that followed. The tweet hadn't been up an hour before Twitter now erupted into chaos. By the end of the evening, 2 hashtags dominated the platform. Hashtag Crockett Clapback and the merciless hashtag Karoline Cancelled. Every corner of the internet seemed to be buzzing with the same energy, the same disbelief at how quickly one perfectly aimed sentence had shifted the balance. The memes came first, flooding timelines like an unstoppable wave. Someone edited Crockett's face onto a gladiator standing victorious in an arena, while Leavitt's likeness slumped in the dust. Others looped the tweet over dramatic music, splicing it into movie trailers as if it were the climactic line of a blockbuster. TikTok creators took turns reenacting the 14 words, each performance more dramatic than the last slow-motion walks. Fake microphones dropping to the floor, captions flashing like neon lights. Jasmine wins. Late-night comedians couldn't resist. One host opened his monologue by holding up a card with the tweet written across it. He paused, stared at the audience, and simply let them laugh, because the line didn't need embellishment. Another joked that Leavitt had been clapped back into another dimension. The moment wasn't confined to political junkies anymore. It had crossed into popular culture, replayed in skits, parodies, and punchlines. Commentators piled in with their hot takes. Some conservative analysts tried to frame Crockett's words as uncivil or beneath the dignity of the office. But those criticisms only underscored the effectiveness of the strike. Progressive voices, meanwhile, hailed it as a masterclass in political communication. Influencers outside the political sphere, even lifestyle bloggers and sports podcasters, found themselves referencing the clapback, proving just how far the ripples extended. For Leavitt, the humiliation was undeniable. Her cancellation attempt, intended to silence and diminish Crockett, had not only failed, but had rebounded spectacularly. Screenshots of her original posts were now circulating with sarcastic captions like, "This aged well." Her defensive replies were buried under quote tweets mocking her tone. It wasn't just a loss, it was a rout. And yet, what fascinated people wasn't simply that Jasmine had won a feud, it was how she had done it. In an era where politicians often respond with walls of text, defensive jargon, or endless interviews, Crockett had flipped the script with economy and poise. 14 words, that was it. No rambling. Just a line so sharp it cut through the noise and left nothing standing. The ripple effect deepened. Political science. Professors cited the exchange in lectures as an example of narrative control in the digital age. Media critics pointed out how Crockett's restraint, the silence before the strike, had amplified the drama, making the eventual reply land with maximum force. Social justice advocates shared the tweet as a rallying cry, proof that authenticity and courage could triumph over smear tactics. By the week's end, the clash had shifted from a viral skirmish into a national conversation. Was this the new standard for political engagement in 2025 America? Could a single tweet now redefine a public figure's image overnight? And more importantly, what did this moment say about who really held the power of the establishment voices? Trying to cancel? Or the grassroots energy that rallied behind Crockett? Everywhere, people debated the implications. Cable panels replayed the feud on a loop, some marveling at Crockett's precision, others fretting over the state of political discourse. Opinion pieces poured in from every angle. The art of the clapback, cancel culture eats its own, why Jasmine Crockett won the internet. The tweet was no longer just content. It was commentary, a mirror reflecting the tensions of America itself. And through it all, Crockett remained calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't escalate. She let the storm swirl, her silence after the mic dropping as strategic as her silence before it. In a way, that restraint spoke louder than any additional post could have. She had already said enough. The country was still talking, still laughing, still debating proof that her words had carved themselves into the public memory. One tweet had turned into a national conversation, reshaping not only perceptions of two politicians, but also the rules of engagement in the digital age. It was the kind of moment that would be studied, replayed, and remembered. But beyond the memes, something deeper was at stake. When the laughter faded and the hashtags began to settle, Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, not with another clapback, but with clarity. She framed the moment not as a personal victory, but as something larger, something that touched the soul of American democracy. This, she said, was never about her alone. It was about the timeless struggle between those who try to silence voices and those who refuse to be muted. Between authenticity and spin, between dignity and the cheap theatrics of the culture war. You can try to cancel truth, Crockett reminded her supporters in a speech days later, but truth always finds its way. The words echoed, not just as a defense against Leavitt's failed attempt, but as a statement of principle. It was a promise to every person who had ever been dismissed, shouted down, or told they didn't belong. Crockett's victory wasn't about dunking on an opponent, it was about showing that resilience. Anchored in truth will always outlast noise manufactured for attention. In that moment, the meaning of the clapback shifted. What had begun as 14 words on a screen transformed into a rallying cry. A reminder that identity is not a weakness to be weaponized, but a strength to be celebrated. For her base, it wasn't just entertainment. It was validation. For those watching from the margins, it was proof that their stories mattered, that their truth could not be erased no matter how many voices tried to drown it out. The lesson was, as simple as it was profound, dignity and courage weigh more than the shallow victories of spin. Leavitt had tried to control the narrative by painting Crockett as unworthy, but in doing so revealed the fragility of her own strategy. Crockett, by contrast, revealed the strength that comes from being rooted in authenticity. The contrast was stark, one politician grasping for attention, the other embodying resilience. Audiences felt it. Commentators noted the unusual silence that followed Crockett's words, not just her own silence, but the stunned quiet that overtook Leavitt's camp. In politics, noise is constant, but silence born of respect, born of realization, that is rare. Crockett had created that moment. She had shown that the fight for voice is not won by shouting louder, but by speaking with a truth so undeniable it still reverberates long after the echo fades. The inspiration stretched beyond politics. Teachers shared the story with students as an example of integrity. Community leaders quoted her line in sermons and speeches. Even outside America, international commentators saw it as symbolic of a larger movement, people reclaiming their voices. In the face of those who would erase them, Crockett herself refused to gloat. She reframed the incident again and again as part of a broader fight, one that transcends her own career. "This isn't about Jasmine Crockett," she told a crowd. "It's about everyone who's ever been told to sit down, shut up, or stay in their place. It's about refusing to let anyone else write your story." And that was the heart of it. The power to define oneself, to claim space, to stand unapologetically tall in the face of erasure. That power resonated far deeper than a meme, far louder than a hashtag. It was the emotional crescendo of the saga, the lasting moral takeaway. Because in the end, it wasn't about 14 words or even one politician's viral moment. It was about the reminder that courage and authenticity endure where arrogance and spin collapse. It was about the universal truth that dignity and yielding, unapologetic dignity, carries more force than 1,000 attacks. It's launched in bitterness or fear. And that's why one tweet spoke louder than 1,000 attacks. Karoline Leavitt tried to cancel her. She tried to write Jasmine Crockett out of the story, to frame her as less than, to make her small. But with one perfectly timed line, Jasmine turned the tables. What was meant to silence became an amplifier. What was meant to humiliate became a triumph. And what was meant to end her voice only made it louder than ever. If you felt that power, you're not alone. Millions of people across the country laughed, clapped, and cheered because they saw themselves in Jasmine's resilience. They recognized the dignity in her words, the courage in her calm, and the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of arrogance. That feeling, that rush of validation, pride, and inspiration is what moments like this are all about. And here's the truth. This fight isn't just Jasmine's. It belongs to all of us. Every time someone tries to silence truth, every time spin is used to drown out authenticity, you're faced with the same choice. Shrink back or stand firm. Jasmine showed us what happens when you stand firm. So if you believe in celebrating truth over noise, authenticity over arrogance, and dignity over cheap theatrics, this is your space. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and join a community that refuses to let voices like Jasmine's be silenced. Get us together. We can make sure stories like this don't just go viral. They change the way America listens. Karoline tried to cancel her, but Jasmine Crockett reminded us all. Truth can't be canceled, and neither can the people who dare to speak it.